I was newly divorced. I was working a very demanding job where I traveled. And so doing all of this work was a bit, you had to be committed to do it, but it was great as far as I was concerned. This bottom picture was what the yard looked like when I sold it in 2009. So 10 years later, that's what it looked like. And I hate to tell you, but the guy that bought it took it all out. Yeah. Now, fortunately, I knew in advance, and master gardeners, my neighbors, my family, our chapter, everybody got plants. Yeah. And so we saved a whole lot of the plants that you will see in these pictures. He said the only thing is don't leave a hole. We didn't. But it really was, I've driven by it once or twice and I really don't want to see it. Not after all I worked. So this is what I started with. A typical yard, lots of carpet grass. You can see, there it is. Right here, that was a neighbor's tree. That wasn't my tree. And it was an oak, and it was a fast-growing oak, and you can see it here. And that's after it had been trimmed several times. I had an arborist come in, and he trimmed it back a lot. It was a beautiful tree, but it was invasive as far as I was concerned. I also had that as a pecan tree that was planted there. And, if you know anything about trees, they get rather large. And so I had a fast-growing oak and the potential of a large pecan tree within about 15 feet of each other. They were not going to be good neighbors. So that thing came out later. I did plant that. That was a red oak because those windows right there was my dining room. And the west sun came in and I wanted something to knock out that west sun. So I put that there. So this is the palette that I started with. Before we get started with that, just a quick aside, we're talking about xeriscaping, and I hear many people call it xeroscaping, and they oftentimes mean that it is zero. Untrue. The word itself comes from xera, which is Greek for dry. Scape means picture, put it together, dry picture. It is xeriscape, and there is no zero. I have corrected many people. I don't think they appreciate it. I'm also a former English teacher, okay? Okay. This, wait a minute, we skipped some. Yeah, I'm skipping. Okay. These two pictures here are xeriscapes. There's nothing zero about them. There's color, there's form, it's interesting. And it's good for the environment because it attracts the beasts to use the flowers. So the 7 basic principles of xeriscaping, this is what you'll be working with. First, you reduce the amount of lawn as much as you can. You don't have to get rid of all of it, but you get rid of at least half. And depending on how big your lawn is, that may be a lot. You develop a good plan. What you're going to put in is going to suit you and your purposes. What do you want to do with this landscape that you're going to put in? How's it going to be used? What's the purpose? You want to group your plants by similar requirements. And this is, I know I was a master gardener, and I remember they kept saying, right plant, right place. That's right. If it likes a lot of water, put it with plants that like a lot of water. If it doesn't like a lot of water, put it with one that doesn't. Because if you don't, you're going to have one dead plant. One or the other is not going to survive. So put like-minded plants together in terms of sun and water. Consider your ecosystem. Get plants that are going to work. Y'all are in the hill country. I live on the Blackland Prairie. So the plants that grow for me probably won't grow too well for you, and vice versa. So know your ecoregion. Accommodate what's already there. That means there are certain things that you can't change. There may be a very large tree that you want to keep. You're not going to change that. You have utility lines. You have hardscape. You may have some outbuildings. These are things you're probably not going to change. I can guarantee you won't change those utilities. You will have areas that you can't mess with because they're reserved for utilities. You need to know all those things and note them because you're not going to mess with any of that. That stays as it is. And you have to make sure you can afford it. You know, we all have big plans, and sometimes you find out how expensive it really is. I just recently put in a relatively short walkway from my back fence to my patio. And I went ahead and bought things piecemeal, and then I had to get a guy help me do it. I had to pay for labor. By the time I finished, I realized that little short walk had cost me $700. Mm-hmm. I really hadn't meant to spend that much money. It looks great. I love it. You need to choose xeric plants, and for us, that means natives. It means that they will, once established, they can grow on the rainfall that you get in your area. You amend your soil if needed. I say this to a lot of people that live in the hill country where you have about that much topsoil. You'll have to go up. You're going to have to use some raised beds. But remember, whatever you're going to plant in there, whatever you put in as that amended soil needs to fit the plant. I had a guy in the Lindheimer chapter that talked about, now when you get ready to do this, and they're on Edwards Plateau, you go out and you get the deepest, darkest, richest soil you can put in. I was going, no, you don't. Your plants won't like it. You can kill them that way. I found that out when I took the course at Lady Bird Johnson it was a 6-session course. And on 2 of them, we went out and walked the garden and talked about plants. We stopped and the head horticulturist was talking to us. We got to Blackfoot daisy, which I just love, but mine would grow about 18 months and just die. And so she said, okay, do you put it in good soil? Uh-huh. Do you water it? Mm-hmm. Do you mulch it? Mm-hmm. She says, you're killing it. It wants bad soil. Don't water it. Leave it alone, and it will be happy as a lark. And she was right. So if you amend your soil too much so that you put it like something that would grow in Blackland Prairie, you won't be successful. So be very careful what you use. I don't think you can go wrong with compost. I think compost is pretty bulletproof. But a lot of our plants in the hill country want that more calcareous soil, the limey stuff. And in fact, one of our landscapers that I work with said, you know, you can use road base. Yes. And so I tried it, and you know what? She was right. You can use road base. Stuff that will grow in the hill country grows in caliche and stuff like that. So it's not totally bad. That Blackfoot daisy would love road base. So that was a real aha moment for me. So be careful when you amend the soil. Don't do too much. You want to mulch. Nature hates bare ground. Now, to a certain extent, if you're gardening for insects, especially butterflies and bees, they do want some bare ground because your bumblebees will make their hives in the ground, and it has to be bare so they can get to it. But for the most part, nature doesn't like bare ground. Weeds come up, anything comes up. So use mulch, just not too much. Usually 2 to 3 inches is plenty. If you get any thicker, if we get some of these little light rains that we tend to get, the rain will never reach the ground. It'll get stuck in the mulch. Use your water efficiently. There are many things you can do. And believe it or not, hand watering can be efficient. I've had the people at the water company say, actually, it's not as bad as it sounds because you're putting the water exactly where you want it. It's not running around and you're not watering everything. So don't apologize if you hand water. It's okay. And practice good maintenance. You want to avoid chemicals because homeowners tend to use too many chemicals and they run off, get into our water, get into our streams, and we end up drinking some of it. That's not good. Mow to the correct height where you have lawn. It doesn't need to look like a golf course. This is your lawn, not a golf course. So don't take it down to where it's just, an inch off the ground. And prune natives correctly. That one's tricky. That's where you have to start learning how to prune natives. You don't handle them like you do the old heirloom pass-along plants. They don't need all that trimming. They don't want all that trimming, but you do need to trim them. So this is a really big topic on how to prune correctly. So those are the 7 basic principles of xeriscaping. Okay. It's on. Greg. Where's Greg? It's not advancing. Did it go? No, it's still 7 basic principles. It's not advancing. This isn't working, and I did the arrow. Even the arrow isn't. That's backwards. One more. What are you hitting? You're hitting the back one.
Down arrow.
Okay, see, I've always hit that on my computer. Okay. Okay, thank you. Let me get away from that. Okay. This particular topic was a big hit at that Xeriscape fair last weekend. San Antonio Water System has a whole write-up on why you shouldn't use rocks. And evidently their homeowners association at the very beginning had advised them to use rocks, encouraged them to, and I was talking to people that hated them. So this was a big topic. Why? Well, first of all, they're not a component of xeriscaping. You notice that was not one of the principles. We didn't talk about rocks. Secondly, they're not maintenance free. Everybody says, oh, you put down the weed cloth. All the weed cloth does is make the weeds harder to pull out. So forget that. It's not maintenance free. If you have trees and they lose their leaves in the fall, you're going to have to be blowing and breaking those things out of your rocks. It's not maintenance free. They will soak up the heat during these hot days and they release it at night, which will make your air conditioner bill higher because your air conditioner is getting all that heat coming in on top of it. It's heating your house. Not a good idea. I hadn't thought of that, but the utility people did. It also increases stormwater runoff because the water doesn't soak in, especially if you put weed cloth under it. So you lose the water. You want to keep rainwater on your soil, on your land. And it has no nutritional value. So don't use rocks. However, you can use them in limited situations. You can use them in rain gardens where you use smaller rocks and, when you dig a depression to hold that water so it'll soak into your soil. It's fine to use it then. Use, if you want to do a walkway, it's fine to use flagstone. It's fine to use a really big, pretty rock as a feature, but not river rock all over your yard. You can use it in the hill strip, that strip between the sidewalk and the street. However, the neighborhood I live in, they added on to it, and they did this on every house. And let me tell you what kids do. They throw them. So, and these are, walks about like that. So they could hurt somebody. Or you can use it for a patio or a walkway. It's okay in limited amount, but don't rock the whole yard. It's not good. All right, let's see if this works. Okay. So Xeriscape doesn't have to look like the pictures on the left. They can look like the pictures on the right. You have greenery, you have color. San Antonio Water System has a whole write-up on why you shouldn't use rocks. And evidently their homeowners association at the very beginning had advised them to use rocks, encouraged them to, and I was talking to people that hated them. So this was a big topic. Why? Well, first of all, they're not a component of xeriscaping. You notice that was not one of the principles. We didn't talk about rocks. Secondly, they're not maintenance free. Everybody says, oh, you put down the weed cloth. All the weed cloth does is make the weeds harder to pull out. So forget that. It's not maintenance free. If you have trees and they lose their leaves in the fall, you're going to have to be blowing and raking those things out of your rocks. It's not maintenance free. They will soak up the heat during these hot days and they release it at night, which will make your air conditioner bill higher because your air conditioner is getting all that heat coming in on top of it. It's heating your house. Not a good idea. I hadn't thought of that, but the utility people did. It also increases stormwater runoff because the water doesn't soak in, especially if you put weed cloth under it. So you lose the water. You want to keep rainwater on your soil, on your land. And it has no nutritional value. So don't use rocks. However, you can use them in limited situations. You can use them in rain gardens where you use smaller rocks and, when you dig a depression to hold that water so it'll soak into your soil. It's fine to use it then. If you want to do a walkway, it's fine to use flagstone. It's fine to use a really big, pretty rock as a feature, but not river rock all over your yard. You can use it in the hell strip, that strip between the sidewalk and the street. However, the neighborhood I live in, they added on to it, and they did this on every house. And let me tell you what kids do. And they throw them. So, and these are, rocks about like that. So they could hurt somebody. Or you can use it for a patio or a walkway. It's okay in limited amount, but don't rock the whole yard. It's not good. So Xeriscape doesn't have to look like the pictures on the left. They can look like the pictures on the right. You have greenery, you have color, which is good, but you're using plants that like to grow where you're planting them. You're appropriate for your ecoregion. All right, stages in planning your Xeriscape. What do you really want? Dream. Let your imagination go. Think about it. I brought this poster. I'd used this for another group that wasn't anywhere near this large. What I've got, you start with the plat that you get when you buy your house, because it has all of the hardscape, your house footprint, sidewalks, driveways. It will also have easements marked if you have utility easements. So these are all things that aren't going to move. You need to know where those are. So you would start with that. And then you go from there. What I'm going to do, I will leave this on the stage when I finish if you want to take a picture of it. But Craig suggested I will take pictures of each one of these individually and email them to him, and he can get them out to y'all. Because these are in sequence. And this is how you would put together an effective plan. It's the step by step by step, starting with the plat that you get when you buy your house. Take pictures of Xeriscapes you like. If your neighbors have some really pretty plants that you like, take pictures. You're not going to remember. And if you don't know what they are, Google has a great thing now that you can find out. iNaturalist can help you. There are Facebook groups that can help you, and you can find out what those plants are so that you can plant something that you know grows well in your area. You saw it. And look in regionally appropriate books. Don't go for an English garden book. It won't work. They have rain. We don't, not much. So go for something that's for Texas or for the Southwest. And you will see things that will be much more doable than a beautiful English cottage garden. Analyze your site. Mark the areas that are special considerations. Do you have a utility easement? The house that I'm going to be showing you had a 6-foot utility easement across the back of my lot. 6 feet's a lot, and it went all the way across the back. So that you need to be aware of, and there is a story I'll tell you connected with that. When you're thinking about putting in flower beds, get a hose or a heavy rope, something that's pretty visible, and make the form that you're thinking of. Try to use curves, because in nature's curvy. You don't see many sharp angles in nature. And it's easier to, work with nature, not against it. So use something like that, leave it in place for a while and see how you like it, because you may not, but you haven't dug up anything. It's easy to fix and change. Draw the plan for your yard. And if you can't do the whole thing at one time, it's okay. Draw the plan for what you want to work on. It may be just one area, which is kind of what I did. And make water permeable hardscape your friend. If you put in a patio, don't cement it in. I have a brick patio, but there's no mortar. Now, do you get little things coming up? Yeah, you do. But agricultural vinegar can solve that real fast. So that means that when the rain falls, it goes into the soil all around your house. And if you have a tree nearby, it will thank you for that. Now, we all have driveways, and there is water permeable concrete. I doubt that any of us have it. And I understand it doesn't last very long either. So, whatever. Choosing your plants, always think natives. Natives for your ecoregion, not just natives. There are a lot of natives in East Texas that are gorgeous, but they're not going to grow here. So natives for your ecoregion. Keep your special considerations. Do you have a little niche that's very protected? Do you have an area that doesn't get any rain? I did a garden at my church, and there's an area that we had to plant stuff, and it has a roof over it. So it gets no rain. It has to have a special consideration there. So be aware of these little niches that we all have in our yards. When you plant spacing for the adult size of your plants. Landscape architects oftentimes plant so that when they walk away, it looks done. It's full. 3 years later, that person is going to hate them because now everything is all jammed up. And I did talk to a landscape architect in San Antonio. He said that he has stopped doing that because he said, I have gotten clients come back 3 or 4 years later going, why did you plant so many plants? I'm taking them out. And that's expensive too. So consider adult size before you put them in. It's a lot easier to change it then than when they're, stick around. Know when your plants bloom and what the colors are. You don't have to do it like you're doing a painting, but if you're concerned about wildlife, you do want continuous bloom. And there are some colors that are better for butterflies and some that are better for bees and so on. But basically, if it blooms, they'll go to it if they're hungry, which they are right now. And then start to implement your plan, but be realistic. You're not Superman or woman. I found that out. I paid the price a few times. Be realistic about it. And when you have something done, celebrate. Sit back and look at it and go, wow, look what I did. That's always very important. Okay. All right, here was the house. I have labeled things so you can kind of see what's there. You see the neighbor's oak tree coming over there. There's that pecan tree. And it was boxwoods that were made into little green rectangles, little green boxes. So that was what I started with. The first thing I put in the red oak, but I actually had it done. A nursery would do it. The next thing I attempted was that pecan tree. My son-in-law and I did. Don't ever do this. That's a pretty good sized tree. He said, wow, I'd really like to have that pecan tree in my yard. And he didn't live very far away. So we started digging. And we dug and we dug and we had dirt everywhere and it was getting dark. And he said, well, let me hook it up to my truck and see if I can just pull it out. Oh, no. He finally got somebody to come and dig it out. It was just too big. We were unrealistic, but he really wanted that pecan tree. So it went away fairly quickly. It was painful, but it worked. That was 5 years later after I'd been working on it. You can see a lot of stuff. The little oak tree has grown a lot. It's coming along, and you'll notice there is no pecan tree anymore. And then when I moved, that's what it looked like. That was the picture you saw before. And it was luscious. Now, I did talk to my daughter just recently who drove by the house about a month ago. And she said, Mom, it's all shade. It doesn't look anything like what you know, and she knew everything had been taken out, but she said the trees, it's all shade. So the neighbor's tree and the red oak tree just all over. Okay, this was when I moved in. The boxwoods were there. They weren't particularly pretty. And they were like that for almost a year. It was about a year later when I finally got to work on this area. And I took out the grass. It was carpet grass, so it came out pretty easily. I started working on those boxwoods, and let me tell you, boxwoods have roots. Those are something to get out. That took a while, but it had been sitting like that for a year. My neighbors, thank heavens, were very tolerant. But a year later, this is what it looked like. I had gotten all the boxwoods out of the indented part there. I had put in rocks. I had mulched it really well. I was beginning to put in natives. I had some mealy blue sage in the actual bed. And then there by the garage, I had Callilophus, which is a great plant, but it doesn't like a whole lot of water. And if you'll notice, there's a slant, and it's slanting toward the Callilophus. It did okay until we had a rainy spring, and it turned up its toes pretty fast. Those pretty pots there, those were the wedding flowers for my daughter, who was getting married on Mother's Day in an outdoor wedding with no plan for rain. Well, guess what happened? It rained. It was interesting, but she had her flowers. Over in front of the window, over here, got some cone flowers, and I had put in some dwarf yopon to get rid of the boxwood. I just think dwarf yopon are much prettier. They're smaller leaves. So that was 2 years after I moved in. The next year, I got into concrete. These, I bought 2 forms at Home Depot. And you can put them down and pour the concrete into them, and it kind of looks like rocks. Well, I got Quickcrete. This ought to be easy. Well, I started back there. Those were rough, but I learned. And I got to the point every day after work, I would come home and I would do 2 forms because that's all I could do. Because it wouldn't set fast enough, I could pick up that first one and move it down. I couldn't do the hopscotch thing. So every day I did 2 forms. So it took a while to get all this in. But before I could do that, I had to learn how to do the base that you put them in. I had to scoop the soil out, put sand down, use a screed to come along and level it and pack it. You learn a lot. It takes time, but it looks so much better. And I didn't have to move pots whenever I mowed the lawn. My back appreciated that. So that was, and you can see this center part here. I've got a desert willow going. The mealy blue sage is doing great. I have some other things that I have now forgotten what they were. I'm sorry. But it was beginning to look pretty good. So that's 3 years. This is the next year. It's now I've done more concrete. Because now I've come down the driveway and I did a walkway through here so that I could cut through the yard and not have to go all the way to the sidewalk along the street. And once again, I was using those forms. You can really be quite creative. And I did not put anything, these are all water permeable. I put small rocks like pea gravel in between them, but the water could soak through these. And I started beds here. There's Barbados cherry. I think I had some zinnias in there too. Now, I planted some stuff that I shouldn't have. That new gold lantana, man, it's hard to get rid of. It's not a native. It's from the West Indies. And getting rid of that stuff is a major operation. Actually, when I moved, that was still there. But I'll show you where else I put it, and I did get rid of it there. So this is coming along nicely. So that's 5 years. It took me that long. Now I was doing some other things, but working on this one thing, I would work a little at a time on each thing until I liked it, and then I moved on to something else. That was the side yard. You'll notice it's got a pretty good swag to it. My neighbor next door loved his carpet grass, and he watered it a lot. It was thick and cushy. So it began to present problems. So first thing I did was the summer after I moved in, just from the sidewalk back to the back, I mowed that grass just as close as I could get it. I did have some bunch of Dallas grass, so I cut it as low as I could. I did have to work on it a bit more. I finally had to dig that out. Mulching it didn't do it. But I went and got the free mulch that you can get from a lot of places, mulched that to the top of that metal edging, which is about 4 or 5 inches, and put in the new gold lantana, which, as you can tell, flourished. It is hardy. And I put in some Greg's salvia there. And way back there, I put in a 1-gallon mountain laurel. People say these are slow growing. This dude wasn't. It went up pretty fast. So that was my first attempt the summer after I moved in. This was a year later. The new gold is doing great. The salvia is doing great. And there is that mountain laurel. It's coming right on up. But it was getting water from my roof. Water's the key. Now, I'm in Blackland Prairie, so it liked that too. It was fine with that. I did have, this is some Mexican oregano right here. And I don't know if you know it, but the flowers are edible. They're kind of peppery. You can put them in salads. And the oregano is used in Mexican cooking. So it really is an herb. And then down next to the street, I put in some petunias and such just to give me some color. Now, this is 4 years later. I decided I needed more break between me and my neighbor, and I was tired of the new gold. It took me that long to get that stuff out. And I dug it every time. But if there's a root left, it will sprout, trust me. So there's that mountain laurel. That's 5 years from a 1 gallon. That is firebush. I know that's not native. There's the Greg's salvia, all down here. And I put in some cenizo. What I didn't figure was my neighbor watered his yard a lot. Cenizo does not like a lot of water. And so this ended up, it's looking pretty decent there, but after it had been there longer, it got leggy, it started losing its leaves, and his lawn was just flourishing, and my cenizo was going to get me out of here. So I did have to take it out. But you learn. Gardens are always changing, which is kind of cool. All right, this is a little bit later now. There is that mountain laurel. It's up over my roof because it was getting water off the roof. And here's my neighbor's carpet grass. And you see it's not that far away. So it's getting lots of water. That was a red bud that just came up. So I left it. You see that the cenizo is gone because it just couldn't handle it. The firebush, I would have to cut that back twice a year. It would be this high because of all the water. It liked it, but it was beautiful. It bloomed. Hummingbirds loved it. The salvia are still there. This is broomweed, which I found out throws a million seeds. So if you want it, it's great, but no, you're going to have a lot of it. I did put in a crinum. This is the Mexican oregano. And I put in a rose favonia right there. And those little dudes will put up with a lot of heat, which they got reflected off of that driveway. Now down here next to the curb, I had a red yucca, and there's some more of the Callilophus, which was pretty happy because it wasn't getting all that rain and the water. It did well down there. This is the backyard. And you'll notice there was a lump back here. I think maybe at one time somebody had dirt brought in and they didn't spread it all. It was kind of weird. But it had nothing. The only thing in the backyard, which you can't see, it's on the other side, was an Arizona trash tree. But that was my only shade, so I left it. So this was right after I moved in. I did have my bird bath out there. 2.5 years later, I have cut flower beds. I've kind of leveled out that lump in the corner so that it's a little flatter. I have put in things like fall aster, flame acanthus back over here, Pride of Barbados. I know it's not native, but it thinks it is. Rudbeckia. I had some heirloom roses. And it was all doing great. I also had some vegetables. That's lemongrass. This is a birdhouse gourd. I had lots of the really cute birdhouse gourds that were growing back there. So it was doing fine. 4 months later, that's what it looked like. That aster was gorgeous. You just can't beat it. The other things, the rose was still blooming. Now, the other thing that I had learned, this is at Rudbeckia, and I left it because the birds eat the seeds, and you want to feed them. So that's one of the things, if you're doing natives, you really need to put up with some untidiness, because that's what the animals like. And when these quit blooming and went to seed and then froze, I left them. And I can't tell you how many little birds made a tunnel underneath that because it was just draped over. And they used that tunnel all winter. It was their shelter. So if you're doing your natives, you really need to put up with a little bit of untidiness. That's the lemongrass. It was still going good. There's the Phlemocanthus. It was going great. Now, 3.5 years later, this is what it has become. The roses are still there, still have the fall aster. I put in a butterfly bush, bad on me. I ended up cutting it down, and this is not a native, and they're not all that great for our butterflies. I added a wax myrtle back in that corner, and it liked it. It really did. Those are evergreen. They put on berries, so they're good for birds. And I didn't have a deer problem. I was in a city where I had no deer, so I didn't worry about it. But I think if you do have a deer problem, I think that might be a good one because it's kind of smelly if you crush the leaves. But this was the chinkapin oak that I added on the other side of the yard to kind of balance off the Arizona ash. And I had perennial phlox, a chili patine, some iris, the pink Mexican petunia. So I planted some bad stuff, y'all. I learned. You do learn. But this was, that was what I had. It looked good and I liked it. So it was doing very well. And that chinkapin oak grew like a weed. It was gorgeous. And have y'all heard they call it when the squirrels just drape themselves out, blotting, I think is the term they're using. The first time I ever saw it was on that tree. It was one hot summer day, and I had squirrels, and this squirrel was just draped over the limb. And I thought, what in the world? So I found it interesting. There is a term. All right, this is 3 years later. This is a year before I left. You can see that chinkapin oak is really going up there. It's really pretty. The wax myrtle is all the way up into there. It's doing well. The roses are gone. Something went wrong with the roses. I don't remember. And they were heirlooms, so they should have done well, but they didn't. Something happened. So I came back with an Anacacho orchid that did well. I still have those fall asters in there. But under the tree, now it's big enough, it has shade. So I've had to change what I put under it. This is part of the change you have to go through. So now I've got inland sea oats. I've got river fern, I've got columbine, and you'll notice those other things that I had under there are gone. So the ones that were not particularly native. This is the story about know your easement, call before you dig. I didn't. That's that 6 foot. This is that 6 foot easement back here. This was the Arizona trash tree. That was my only shade. So I wanted to shade gardens. That was the only place I had to put it. So one Memorial Day, I got out there and I came 6 feet out. I just covered that whole easement thinking that all the wires and whatever would be in the center. Not necessarily. So took all that grass out, put in shade plants, went in that evening, and I didn't have a phone. I had cut the phone line. And I did it because I was using metal edging, and you have the little stakes that you pound in. Well, the stake went through the wire. But the phone company got me back because I called them and I went, I'm sorry, They came out a few days later and they sprayed that navigation orange paint all over everything. Like, that's where it is. Like, yeah, I know. So call before you dig if you know you have an easement. Don't be in a hurry. Think ahead. So a couple of years later, I've got aspidistra, wood fern down here, fire spike, none of them, almost nothing native. The salvia guaranitica, which is the kind of purpley, and then this is the dwarf ruellia. I made mistakes. That's why you don't have a plant list for this presentation. I don't want you to plant this. But it looked pretty back there, and the tree was great. Then in 2008, my Chica pin oak was big enough that it was giving me all the shade I wanted, and it was time for the Arizona trash tree to go away. So I had an arborist come in, take it down, dig out the roots and everything. And right there where that square foot gardening is, that's where the root was that they had dug down. I still had to pull out some roots, but I could use it. So now this used to be shade. It's not anymore. It's full sun. So everything has changed. My vegetables are over here because they like that sun. I put in a spider lily over here. I have ginger, but that was in pots. Those were potted plants. And there's my almost done tomato plant that was in the square foot gardening. And then during this time, my mother passed away, and my coworkers gave me a redbud tree for her, which I had to leave, but it was very sweet of them to do that. So I could put it there, and it had plenty of sun because the Arizona ash tree was gone. So you can see how everything just evolved. And sometimes you make mistakes and you have to go back and fix them. We all do. So what did I learn? Well, patience was probably the biggest. Start with whatever bugs you the most. That's what's going to bug you. So just go ahead and work on it, whatever it is. Be realistic. Don't overdo it. And plan. If you're going to be working with utilities, call. They don't charge anything. Prioritize what you care about. Do you want to garden for wildlife? Are you gardening for water conservation? Are you gardening for color? Why are you doing it? What's your purpose? And keep that in mind. Ask for help and expert advice when you need it. I ask a lot of questions. I was very active in the Master Gardeners at that time. And so you can see some of the stuff I did was very Master Garden-y. Because they weren't native plants particularly, but it did help. Don't rush. Don't get in a hurry. You'll regret it. You'll do something that you wish you hadn't done. And finally, take time to enjoy what you've done. Appreciate it. Show it off.